Hi, Vanessa here from the Pigeon Letters Design Team, and today I'm going to be showing you how to paint a spiral galaxy. To begin, we are going to lightly sketch a spiral on our watercolor paper. It could be as loose as you want. It doesn't have to be exact, but these are some of the lines that we're going to follow when we start painting the piece. We're going to find a point in the middle of our paper and add a few curved lines spiraling out from that point. Using a flat wash brush, we are going to thoroughly wet the paper. Since Arches paper is fairly textured, I'm going to use the wash brush in both directions, across and then up and down, to make sure that the entire paper is thoroughly saturated with water. The trick to this is not to form any puddles on your paper. So when you're dragging your brush across the paper, make sure you take it all the way across and not lift it up while it is in the middle of the paper. This will help you avoid any large puddles on your paper. You want it to be a sheen of water instead of puddles. Switching from your flat brush to a round brush, I will be using a size 8 round. I will be using my lightest blue color, which is turquoise green by Sennelier, and following the pattern that I drew on the paper initially. Using the same color, I will be tracing over every line that I added to my paper. It doesn't have to be in one smooth motion. If you lift up your brush during the tracing of the lines, that's okay. You'll have little splotches of paint that begin to spread out on the water, and those are some things that we are going to smooth out a little later. Switching over to a bit of a darker color, this is going to be Phthalo Turquoise by Daniel Smith. I am going to start going over those same lines in this shade. As you can see here, I am going right over some areas and going off to the side in other areas. As you approach the middle of your piece, so the very middle where the swirls start, try to use the tip instead of the broad side of the brush. This will give you a finer stroke as you are painting in the middle of your piece so that the colors all don't run in together. If your strokes are too bold or too heavy, you can go in with a clean, damp brush, no paint on it, and smooth out any of those edges. As you can see here, there's no extra paint on my brush. I'm just going right over the same line that I painted and just smoothing out those edges and lightening the color just a little bit. You can also get rid of any excess paint or water by tapping your brush on a paper towel before going in and painting with it. Once you're satisfied with the initial look of the spiral, you can start painting the background. So for the background, I'm going to use a mixture of Peacock Blue by Magello Mission Gold and Anthraquinone Blue by M. Graham. Making sure that my brush is completely loaded with this color, I am going to go around and trace the very edges of my paper. And as you can see here, there is no right or wrong way to do it. Just go in and lay the paint down, add more paint to make it darker. If you wish, add a little bit more water to make it lighter. Just make sure to cover all of the edges and round out the corners of the spiral. Once the outer areas of the spiral are painted, it's time to begin to fill in some of the lighter areas inside of the spiral. So using that same rounded motion, I'm going to use the exact same color mixture that I was using, and I'm going to start bringing some of it into the spiral. Just remember to keep your motions rounded and follow along with the guidelines that you set for yourself when you were painting the spiral. As you can see here, I'm making some areas much darker than others. You want to provide a bit of contrast when working with the spiral. So you want to have a few areas where they're very light and then a few areas where the darkness of the space around it runs into the spiral. And again, remember, just as when you were painting the spiral, as you approach the middle, use the tip of your brush more than you would use the broad side of your brush. This will keep the strokes finer inside of that spiral. Now it's time to go in and further define the spiral by using one of the previous colors that you used. In my case, I'm going to go back to the phthalo turquoise and I'm going to add a bit of it in between the blues that we just added. So for this, you don't have to do exactly as I am doing here on the screen. Just kind of follow your intuition, go with the flow, go with what you feel. If you want to leave it the way it is, then absolutely feel free to do that. If you want to darken some areas, go ahead and add a little bit more color, but just kind of go with what you're feeling at the moment. One thing that I like to do when I am painting is to step back. If I'm sitting, I like to get up and look at my painting from a different perspective. This usually gives me an idea of where my painting is at the moment and if there are any additions that I want to make. In this case, I took a look at it and I decided that it was just a little bit too circular for me. So in order to fix that, I used a little bit of the phthalo turquoise and I pulled it out to the edges of the paper. So instead of going in this circular fashion, I took one of the swirls and swirled it out to the edge of the paper on top and another one along the bottom that I swirled out to the edge of the paper. One other thing I noticed when taking a step back and looking at my piece is that I wanted to add a little bit more color to it. I didn't want it to be quite as blue as it was. So I took a little bit of purple, and this purple is Bright Clear Violet by Magello Mission Gold, and I added just a touch of the purple to two of the swirls. One along the top that kind of ventures out past the edges of my paper, and then one in the middle that runs along the bottom of the piece. And now it's time to further darken the edges of our spiral galaxy. So in order to do this, I'm taking that initial mixture that I had of the blues and I am going to add some Payne's Gray. And this Payne's Gray is by M. Graham. So I'm adding a bit of Payne's Gray to darken up the mixture a bit. And I am adding it to the edges of the spiral galaxy. After the edges are completely covered with a very dark blue, and I like to make it as dark as I possibly can, I'm going to start bringing some of that dark blue into the spiral. I like to do this because it helps the spiral like really pop out from the page, and it also gives it a really nice contrast at the end. So remember how I said that I like to have my background really, really dark? I really do. I love a really dark, dark background. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going in with straight Payne's gray and adding it over that blue. Now the paper is still wet, so it's going to blend in very nicely with the blue underneath. You're still going to see a lot of that blue shine through because we are working wet on wet. And it's just going to give it, that little extra oomph that you need. So finally, one of the last things we're going to do is lighten the middle just a little. And in order to do this, we are going to use a technique called lifting. So you're going to thoroughly clean off your brush, grab a paper towel, dry it on the paper towel a bit, and start very gently rubbing some of that paint in the middle off of the paper. And as you can see here, it's just a very, very gentle rub. You don't want to scrub too hard because you don't want to damage the paper underneath. You can make it as light as you want. You can leave it the way it was if you'd like. I just like to have a little bit of light coming through on the inside of the spiral. Let your piece fully dry before moving on to this next step. Now we're going to be adding a bit of stars to the galaxy. I'm going to be using Copic Opaque White, which is a white alcohol-based ink. Now you can use any white that you have, whether it be gouache, watercolor, acrylic, doesn't really matter. You are going to go with a small brush. Just remember, the larger the brush you use, the larger the bits of splatter are going to be on your paper. So using a small brush, just pick up some of that white paint and tap it onto your paper. You can use another brush as I did here, or just tap it with your finger. And then using the very point of that small brush, I'm going to add a couple of more pronounced noticeable stars. And with that, you are completely done with your spiral galaxy. I hope that you enjoyed this one, and I will see you all next time.